For more on this story, we can bring in Benoit Dillet, who's a senior lecturer in politics, languages and international studies at the University of Bath. Thank you very much for speaking to us on France 24. I'd like to start by this scale of today's protests, hundreds of thousands, almost a million, as James Andre just mentioned there. How much of a test is this for the new Prime Minister?
Sorry, he's only been nominated since last week as a prime minister. Thank you for having me. Sorry, I was muted at the beginning. Sébastien Lecornu does not change much to the present political crisis. And I think what we are facing right now in France is a fiscal crisis and a political crisis.
And these protests are a pretty common sight in France, but here today we get the sense that there's real anger on the street about a range of different issues, as we've said. Is there something about this movement that stands out to you?
Yes, I think it's very much in continuation with the pension reform strikes that we witnessed 2 years ago. So it's a lot more, if you want, scattered or distributed throughout France, which is a kind of inheritance from the Yellow Vest movement in 2018 and 2019. It's no longer simply concentrated or focused on the Paris capital, but it's really spread out in smaller towns. What we saw with the pension reform strikes and demonstrations, where some towns you had about, some towns of 80,000 inhabitants, you had around 50,000 people demonstrating. So very, very large gathering in smaller towns as well that need to be taken into account.
And we can compare today's protest also to a more informally organised action last week that kind of failed to block everything as they said they wanted to do. What do today's demos need to achieve in order to qualify as a success?
That's a very good question, and I think it will be, only time will tell. I think the main demand is very much for Macron to go. The presidential elections are a little less than 2 years away, and the French people are really impatient, and they simply want a change. They want a change, and they also at the same time disillusioned by all the promises of change that Emmanuel Macron and the numerous prime ministers have said every single time. So Le Cornu is supposed to be someone who wants to listen, who wants to have compromise, but it doesn't really cut it now with the French people. They are really disillusioned with the political class.
Right, and not only is Macron unlikely to resign, I mean, you can tell me if you disagree, but also this new prime minister that he's nominated is meant to be a Macron loyalist.
That's right. So it's difficult on both sides in a way for the protesters or for even the politicians in the opposition, let's say the left. They don't want to make alliances with Le Cornu because that will basically be a mistake with the sight of the presidential election in 2 years, in 2027. And at the same time, Macron, we're not sure if he's going to dissolve the National Assembly. He can now, since June this year. So there could be early parliamentary elections, but it's not really clear that we'll get something different, a configuration which is different than the current hung parliament with three main parties or movements, if you want. The radical left, the center-right, as well as the far-right. It doesn't look like the parliament could be any different. So therefore, it's a kind of game of patience for the next, if you want, 18 months to 2 years.
And as we mentioned, Le Cornu is meeting with unions and other members of the opposition. What do you think it's going to take to get, notably the Socialists or any other party on board so that he too doesn't get struck down by a no-confidence vote?
Yes. So it's unprecedented. Lots of unprecedented things happened in the last couple of years. So we've seen first, obviously, two prime ministers that have received votes of confidence, and it was unprecedented in the Fifth Republic. And the fact that also Macron basically nominated people who didn't come first in the parliamentary elections. They nominated someone from Les Républicains who arrived only with 7% of the vote, so they were very much down the bottom. And really, it is for the turn of the left to govern at this point. So you're absolutely right. It comes down to certain policies, and one of the main policies is the so-called Zuckman tax, that the left really wants to use that as their, if you want, signature policy to move ahead.
And tell us more about what that tax entails.
So this is a tax of 2% on individuals who have a wealth of more than 100 million euros. In the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a huge increase in the wealth of billionaires, and it is to send a signal to. So first of all, is to kind of make up for the lack of fairness, the fact that they're not really paying enough tax or income tax at all because of the way they manage their wealth. And second is to really send a signal to the 99% of the population that those billionaires should actually also bear some of the cost of the debt crisis at the moment. That it's only fair if the very richest pay a bit more, so 2% on 100 million wealth, which is not asking for a lot, while obviously their wealth increases every year by 6 to 8%. So it will they will only increase their wealth by 4 to 6%, which is still a huge increase.
Right, so that's what the socialists want. What about the far-right National Rally? Where do they come in all of this? Could they also be the kingmakers here? And does this kind of political stagnation make them look even stronger ahead of presidential elections in 2027?
So the far right, they want to basically portray that France is in crisis, and it's very messy, and there are, bins burning in the streets, and all that is obviously helping the far right to show that there is disorder, and they're going to bring the order, and mostly going to focus on the anti-immigrants stance. Regarding economics, it's not very clear where they stand, because the rhetoric is very much they want to be socially progressive. But when it comes to voting, the Zuckman tax was presented at the National Assembly, and they voted against. So they voted for an amendment that was basically going against the main idea of the tax. So therefore, they actually aligned a lot more on Macron's economic policies than they would want to admit it.
All right, Benoit Dillet, thank you very much for your analysis. We'll have to leave it there.
Thank you for having me.